Hey guys, welcome back to my channel, Simone here. So today is another Reads and Recommends video, and this time I'm doing historical fiction, which is one of my favourite genres if I'm honest. I especially like World War II, but not all of these books are from World War II. There are a couple obviously. The funny thing is, all of the 5 read books that I have to talk about, I don't actually have copies of anymore because, as I told you before, I don't keep books once I've read them. But the books that I want to read, I own 3 of them, so I'll be able to show you them, otherwise I'll put the pictures up on the screen, so it's all good. So let's get started with the 5 books that I have already read and loved. So the first one is The Book Thief by Marcus Zusak, and I absolutely adored this book. This basically follows a young girl, Liesel, whose parents end up in a concentration camp, and so she's fostered by a German family. And I did love this book. I think I've talked about it in a previous video somewhere, which I'll try and link below if I can find it. But basically I said that my problem with it was that it was narrated by death, and so I struggled to kind of relate to the book because it was quite like distant from it. However, I did love the story itself. It's about books as well, which is just obviously what we all love on this channel. But basically it follows a girl who essentially is stealing books because the Germans or the Nazis are essentially burning the books because they don't want people to get hold of books that haven't been like personally vetted by them. So I really liked this. Like I said, this the story is brilliant. It's set in World War II, so it's perfect, and it's got some really resilient characters in it. My favourite character is actually Liesel's foster father, Hans, begins with a G, and I can't remember, so I will put it somewhere on the screen. Yeah, I really liked this, and I would definitely recommend if you haven't read it already. Also, the film is really, really good. The second one is one that also had a brilliant film adaptation, and that is The Help by Catherine Stockett. It follows Skeeter, I think her name is, who's a journalist, and she wants to write. So she decides, she comes up with this story idea, or this book idea should I say, where she interviews the help of the people that live in the town she lives in, because basically this is set in the 50s, where black people generally are the help for white people, and so they kind of bring up their children and clean and cook for them. And Skeeter doesn't like this. Obviously the black people don't really like it either, but they kind of have to. They're treated as second-class citizens, and so this book kind of explores that and talks about the things that happen to real people and the kind of their own stories. This was a beautifully written book. Like, I really loved this. I also thought the adaptation was amazing. Emma Stone was in it, Viola Davis is in it, like, they're amazing and they're really good actresses, so I loved that. But honestly, I would say, even though this wasn't about World War II, I might even say this is one of my favourite historical fiction books, because it was fantastic. Then the third one is definitely my favourite historical fiction book of all time, and this is a World War II book. This is The Nightingale by Kristen Hanna, and I read this while I was on holiday to Ireland last year with my boyfriend, so not only was it a fantastic book, but it also has some really good memories associated with it in my kind of, when I think about it. But I really loved this book. It basically follows these 2 sisters, Vianne and Isabel, who are French, and they are living in France at the time of the Second World War. And they are essentially like dealing with it in 2 very different ways. So Vianne is very she kind of goes along with it because she's got 2 young children, and you know, her husband's in a concentration camp, and she's just trying her best to let them get on with it and kind of hope that they'll go away soon. Whereas Isabel's she's much more wants to get out there and do something about it. Like, she joins like a freedom revolution, I guess, like the French Revolution-y kind of thing, and I mean, it was brilliant. The book was great. It really showed the 2 sisters in, like, they're very different, but they both did their bit, if you know what I mean. Really, really great, and yeah, it was brilliant. It was such a good book, and it really made me want to go back and continue reading. The fourth one is To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee. Oh, I had to think about that then. Could you tell by the look in my eyes? This was brilliant. Now, if you didn't know, I did a law degree at university, so I really like reading books that have law intertwined in them. And this basically was a book that was set around the same time as The Help, I believe. But basically, it's about these 2 children, Scout and Jem, whose father, Atticus Finch, who I'd heard loads of things about the name Atticus Finch and I did not put 2 and 2 together, And then when I read this I was like, oh, that's who Atticus Finch is. But basically Atticus Finch is a lawyer, and he takes the case of a black man who has been accused of killing 2 white guys who raped his young daughter. I think that's right. Yeah, the white guys raped his daughter and then he killed them, and then now he's on trial. And it's basically just showing the kind of reaction he gets from the community, because basically society is like, he's black, he must be guilty. So they all kind of look down on him for taking the case, and it's that relationship between the 2 children and their dad, and right and wrong, and kind of seeing that everybody's the same and that we shouldn't like we would be prejudiced essentially. But it was so good. It was great to see it from 2 children's perspective, because you kind of see that innocence that children tend to have, where they have these kind of open opinions until people put their own opinions onto them. So it was really great to see this kind of like view of the world from these 2 children. So I really liked this one too. And then the final one is one I actually didn't like when I first read it. I think I read It's Atonement by Ian McEwan, and I read this first of all quite a few years ago, and I think maybe I was just a bit too young for it and didn't really understand it, because when I read it, it meant nothing to me, and I was like, this is a load of rubbish. And then I watched the film and I kind of understood a bit more, and then I reread the book and I absolutely loved it. I think it's really well written, and the like message behind it is really like important. And basically it's about a young girl named Bryony who has a crush on this kind of she's a young girl and he's like the gardener, I guess you'd say. And so she's got a crush on him, and then she sees him in a compromising position with her older sister, and so something happens and she kind of blames him for it, and then it's the repercussions of that, and then her wanting forgiveness. And it's got a lot of great parts to this. Like, it's got a good section of it which is set in the World War, which again I've always said I liked, and it's really interesting. It's not a book that I would necessarily have thought I would have liked, but actually having read it and also watched the adaptation, I really enjoyed it, and I would definitely recommend. Then on to the books that I haven't yet read but I really want to read, and the first one is Burial Rites by Hannah Kent. I'm going to read the back to you because I don't know too much about this book. So it says, Northern Iceland, 1829. A woman condemned to death for murdering her lover. A family forced to take her in. A priest tasked with absolving her. But all is not as it seems, and time is running out. Winter is coming, and with it the execution date. Only she can know the truth. This is Agnes's story. And as far as I know, this is actually a debut novel, and it's set in Iceland. And I don't think I've read a book that's set in Iceland before. Especially not one that's set in the 1800s, so I'm really fascinated to read this book, and I've heard nothing but great things about this. And it's also in the front, it's got like 4 pages just full of authors and magazines like saying how amazing it is. It's got like Karen Slaughter, who I really love, and just loads of different things. So yeah, no, I've heard really great things, and so I cannot wait for this one. The next one I've heard nothing but good things about, but I honestly don't know what it's about, and I don't own it, so I can't really tell you too much about it. But basically this is Salt to the Sea by Rites, and I believe this has got something to do with a ship that went down. I feel like it's set in Russia. I could be wrong. Again, I'll put something up on the screen to tell you what it's actually about. But yeah, I really want to read this. I've heard great things about Rites' writing. I think she's got another book out too, and I can't remember what it's called. Between Shades of Grey, I think it's called. And I want to read that one too. But Rites is an author I think that has had a lot of praise, and so I really want to try out her work. Then I have one that's probably going to confuse a lot of you, and this is Crossstitch by Diana Gabaldon, which I assure you a lot of you have heard of this, even if you don't think you have, and that's because this is Outlander, but this is what it was originally named when it first came out in the UK. I don't really like the fact it's a tiny little thing, but I ordered this online, I believe, and this is how it came, and I mean, I'm okay with it because, yeah, it sounds alright. It's set in Scotland. I know that Sasha from A Book Utopia always talks about this book. She's like obsessed with it. I also think this is about like 7 books long or something, this series. So, and it's quite a chunky book. Like, how big is this one? 860 pages. So, I mean, I will read this, and I think I might read it quite soon. I've just sort of decided just then. But this is set in 1945. It's like a time travel thing, so there's 2 lives. So in 1945, she's on honeymoon with her husband in Scotland, and then she walks through a stone circle in the Highlands and finds herself in a violent skirmish, that's a fun word, taking place in 1743. And then so essentially she's set in, like, in this war-torn thing, and she falls for this guy even though she's on a honeymoon with this other guy, and I guess she has to try and figure out how she's going to get home, if she wants to get home, and how she's going to like have these two different guys who are completely different. Really excited for this. Like I say, I've heard nothing but great things, so this will be on my TBR for really soon. Then I have one that I just talked about in my latest book Nocturne, stack 3, which I'll link below, and this is The Boy in the Striped Pyjamas by John Boyne. I always want to say The Boy in Striped Pyjamas, but it's in The Striped Pyjamas. And the tagline of this is, "A story of innocence in a world of ignorance." So this follows a little boy named Bruno whose family live in Berlin, and his dad is some kind of officer in the army, and in the German army that is, and they move out to this little like desolate area where they don't know anybody and there's nobody around, and Bruno sees a farm, or what he thinks is a farm, and he goes along and he meets this young boy named Shmuel, I think is how you say it, Shmuel, yes, who's wearing pyjamas, and he's so innocent, he doesn't know what it is. Obviously we know, especially from the front, that it's a concentration camp and that Shmuel is in this concentration camp, but it's their friendship, and I've seen the movie and it makes me cry, so I did say in the last video that I'm quite scared to read this because I think I'm going to cry, but it's only 212 pages long, so I feel like it's not going to take me very long at all, is it? But yeah, I feel like this is going to be very emotional. And then the final one is actually a play, and I have read this before. I read this when I was at school, but I've never read it for like pleasure, and I really did enjoy it at the time, but it was such a long time ago. I think I was in year 10, which means I was, let me work out how old that means I was, 14, I'm gonna say, like 14 or 15, so that was, oh my goodness, that was 10 years ago, wow. And so I don't remember any of it, but basically it's The Crucible by Arthur Miller, and this is a play about witches, and it's the whole historical thing where basically they used to, if someone was accused of witchcraft, they would essentially shove them into a pool, and if they drowned then they were innocent, and if they didn't drown then they were a witch. And obviously we know that both of those things, because if they were a witch they got burnt at the stake, so they were both basically going to die either way. But it's a whole play about that, and again, like I said, I really enjoyed it at the time, but I really want to revisit it because I feel like now I'm older I'll kind of appreciate it more. There is also a movie adaptation which has got Winona Ryder in it, who is basically completely psycho in it, but you know, what are you going to do? So that is my Reads and Recommends historical fiction video. I hope that you really liked this video. Let me know in the description box which one of these 5 books that I want to read you would recommend reading first, and also if you have any other historical fiction recommendations, because you know how much I like to hear from you. So give this video a thumbs up if you liked it, and subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye guys!